Welcome, I'm Katie Smith and I've got the privilege today to interview Samantha Backman. She's an inspiration to many people across the globe and she's not only found herself but she's living her dream. Samantha, tell us your story.
Thank you. So it's funny, Kate, you asked me about my life, and the funny thing is that I've only just really discovered who I am in the last I say the last few weeks. It's really been the last few years, but when I say the last few weeks, it's the last few weeks. Everything just has sort of hit me all of a sudden. So I'm still trying to work out who I am or what I want to be when I grow up. But let me start with the story of my life and how it all started. I'm a dairy farmer's daughter and ate everything from the tongue to the testicles growing up. So my diet certainly you would consider healthy growing up on a dairy farm, but it wasn't really. In fact, I ended up with cervical cancer at a very, very young age. And my research made me look into why people have cervical cancer and looking at, well, let's take responsibility for ourselves. The bottom line is we have more healthcare, more medicine, more doctors, more nurses, more specialists, more drugs, more alternate medicines, more alternate therapies than we've ever had in our whole existence. Yet we're the sickest, unhealthiest and fattest we've ever been. So you've got to say that something's wrong in that equation. So with looking at that, and one of the things I looked at with research, in 1945 we had 1 in 8,000 people get cancer. Now it's 1 in 4. So with all the medicine and that we've got, we're actually, obviously it's not working. So I looked at that, and that's what took me into medicine, because one book said do this and one book said do that, and I thought, okay, well, how am I going to, look at saving my own life, or at least having some sort of an input into it, if I don't understand the facts? Because I worked out pretty soon you can't necessarily trust your doctor. Not saying doctors are bad. In fact, I've done medicine myself. But they study books. Let me put it another way. When I went in and started to study, I looked at certain books that were written by certain people that obviously had a vested interest. So therefore, I decided to do independent research. Anyway, cutting the story short, I went through and studied toxicology, biochemistry, reflexology, iridology, natural medicine, nutrition, dietetics, everything I could to understand how the human body worked. And what I discovered is that 80% of diseases are diet-related. In other words, 8 out of every 10 people feed themselves their own disease. I call it death by knife and food. We're literally digging our own graves with our teeth. We're killing ourselves and our children. So again, I'm going to cut this story short because it takes me about 4 days to tell you the full story. But I ended up in medicine into toxicology, and I really just didn't find my passion there. I knew what I needed to do with people, and that was to change their diet. And of course, the majority of people don't want to change their diet. They're so addicted to their foods, their coffee, their something or other. I can't kind of think of what that word was, and I'm not allowed to say too much, but you've kind of got where I'm going. And these sort of foods actually take away more energy than what they give us. In other words, we eat certain things and we feel tired and lethargic and we bloat and we don't feel good. So part of my journey to find who I was started off with good nutrition. In fact, I became a vegan, which was great for me, and I just ate raw foods, but I tell you what, I lost all my friends. No one ever invites you to a barbecue when you're a vegan. So, and me growing up on a dairy farm where we ate everything from the tongue to the testicles, it was like such a big change to eat raw foods. Anyway, again, cutting the story short, and I won't say that again because you've got the point by now, but what I did is I started to eat raw. In fact, I ate raw for 7 months. And in that time, boy, did it change me. My nails started to grow, my hair started to get thicker, I had more energy, I slept less than I've ever slept before. I mean, once upon a time it was 8 or 10 hours that I needed to sleep. And now all of a sudden I'm sleeping 4 hours, waking up bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and had so much energy. So with that, I found the passion for health and really what we are. If you don't eat, you die. So therefore, what you eat obviously makes you. In the end, I went back into oncology and they discovered that the cancer had actually gone. And they said, oh, well, this is what we call spontaneous remission. And I said, well, don't you think I've had something to do with it? No, that hasn't been proven, they said. So anyway, I walked out with an attitude, not that I didn't already have one to begin with. So I really wanted to save the world, and I wanted to teach them how to eat and how to be vibrant and healthy and stop the diseases. And as I said earlier, the 80% of diseases are diet-related, all the degenerative diseases. Even things like MS, we now know that is associated with artificial sweeteners. to tell that story another way, and I always put stuff in layman's terms because people understand it a lot better. So if we understand, let me give you another product. So we've got artificial sweeteners, which you can Google aspartame and find out how it kills animals. But we look at fly sprays, have the same sort of thing. They're a nervous system toxin. So when you spray a fly and it lays there on its back, you'll find if you go back a little bit later and you touch it, it's laying there, but it's not actually dead, it's paralysed. So what these sort of things is paralyse the nervous system, so we get pins and needles and numbness, and we don't realise that this is a symptom of the product that we've had earlier on. And because the most specialists will say, okay, that's the symptoms, let's give you a drug to stop the symptoms. They're not really going back to the cause. So with having cancer and cervical cancer, I looked at what may be the cause, and if diet was a big part of who I am, in fact it was me, because without nutrition you're not going to obviously live at all. That's what made me, get the passion for eating. But I also looked at the chemicals. And growing up on a dairy farm, there was one particular chemical we use, if you can call it a chemical, it's a fertiliser called super, also known as organophosphate. And it turned out that in the Middle East they had banned it from a certain country, and when they did, they found that the female cancer rate dropped by 30%. Now, this is a big change in the cancer rate. So looking at that, and then apart from diet, I started to look at chemicals that we use, the sort of things that we put under our arms, deodorants, perfumes, the makeup we use and all that sort of thing. I ended up founding a company called Revival Life, which really looked at the different products that we use on our body, including in our kitchen, whether we've got, aluminium pots and that sort of thing. And what I came up with was a whole range of products, and the way I looked at it is from the head to the feet and inside out. So I looked at what hair colour I use, not that actually I do use colour, but it's henna because there's a few grey hairs coming through these days. I don't like to admit that, but that's the truth. So I looked at that, the sort of makeup, and I found a makeup called Young Blood, which is powdered minerals, and then went down and looked at the deodorant, so now I use a crystal, and all the way down, and of course I came to the vaginal area. And I looked at the instances of toxic shock syndrome using tampons. And with that I thought, hang on a minute, one of the things that I used to use is not only tampons, but I'd leave them in overnight and all that sort of thing. So I started to do the research into toxic shock and tampons, and found that there are dioxin, chemical bleaches, all these sort of things that are absorbed into the vagina, causing problems. So I thought, okay, cervical cancer, I wasn't eating very well. In fact, I was eating really terrible. I had a lot of chemicals that I had around me on the farm growing up, and I was using tampons. So with that, with a bit more research, I decided that the tampon industry was something that I was going to really look at, and the pad market, of course, because also if you've got a pad, it's got chemical bleaches, dioxin, same sort of things that are in a tampon, and you've got the vulva area of the vagina, where of course is an area where the pad sits and chemicals are absorbed into there. I'm getting to the story of why they call me the vagina doctor, which you just asked, Katie. So with that, I decided to manufacture menstruation products, which was obviously going to be to the point that they didn't have these problems associated with them. So I developed a product called the Alicia, and the Alicia is actually a menstrual pod which inserts into the vagina, made of a medical grade silicone. In other words, it doesn't have the chemical bleaches in there that are absorbed into the mucous membrane of the vagina. So that's how I got the name the Vagina Doctor, of course, because of what I was doing with that product. When I looked at the research which said that 48% of women use tampons and 52% use pads, I decided, okay, I'm going to be different. I knew when I entered the tampon market that was a given. So I decided to hit the pad market first, and the pad market tends to be, the majority of them are third world. Next thing, I find myself on I'm on a ship now, but I wasn't on a ship then. This is a long story where we're doing this filming. We're actually on the HMS, what do we call it, the President here in London. Damn cold, let me tell you. Anyway, went into third world and started to work with women on vaginal hygiene. I was absolutely amazed to find out that these women, in fact, just about all of them, they say two-thirds they say actually, not one-third when they put it of a country, but two-thirds of them suffer from constant vaginal candida. The reason for this is lack of cleanliness, and it's very easy in third world areas when you're squatting to wipe from the rectum to the vagina. So, of course, these women just didn't understand the basics of hygiene. I've actually seen young girls where the labia has fused together through lack of cleaning that area properly. It causes infertility, urinary tract infections, and constant soreness of the vaginal area. So in other words, I found my passion and I went, this is where I can make a difference. I really understood how the vagina works, long story on that one, but because of my own experience with toxic shock and cervical cancer. So I decided to educate. I wrote a book on vaginal hygiene and just basic hygiene for women, and we take it for granted that we know how to clean ourselves, but that absolutely isn't the case when you look at third world areas. As soon as I got into third world, I just thought this is where I can make most of a difference. Anyway, with that, here's me in India most of the time in my life and working with villagers and educating them and using a bit of humour. Long story, I've also been a stand-up comedian for many years, so I found that humour can get you into places where common sense doesn't, let me tell you. So with that, I'm travelling throughout, third world areas and making a difference. This is the whole premise of the story that I'll get to the good bit. So with that, a man by the name of Mark Victor Hansen, who's the author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, and I think it's the 1 Minute Millionaire and a few others he's done, he's quite a good friend of mine. He said to me, Samantha, come over to a seminar in LA called HUB, Humanity Unites Brilliance. And he said, come over, we've got humanitarians from all over the world. Introduce yourself around and perhaps you can, do some networking and find others to help you on your cause, because up until then I'm completely self-funded, just jumping on a plane, ending up somewhere, working with Rotary, World Health Organisation, UN, people like that to sort of get me into places, but as I said, completely self-funded with that. Anyway, I end up in this seminar, and it's really funny because I come off the plane straight from India. And here's me, I arrived, it must have been about 11 o'clock in the morning, I think, and the seminar had started at 9 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, I walk in the back of the room, timing was absolutely perfect, and here's Mark Victor Hansen standing on stage. And as I walk in the back of the room, he says, oh my God, he said, we've got the vagina doctor just walk in. Well, let me tell you, 750 heads went, what does a vagina doctor looks like? So here's me still wearing the sari, and Mark starts to tell about what I was doing and educating women on basic hygiene, of which we take for granted. So anyway, next thing he says, actually, Samantha, come up and say a few words. So he's doing this introduction as I'm walking through the crowd and people are looking at me standing there in the sari. Anyway, I get up on stage and he puts his arm around me. I said, well, actually, with all this talk on vaginas, let me tell you, after 4 children, mine looks like a Subway with the lot. Anyway, Mark's got his arm around me and he said, oh, I forgot to tell you, she's a stand-up comedian as well. And I said, yeah, well, actually, I've just walked in, wasn't prepared for this talk, just come off the plane, and actually just had a Brazilian coffee on the way here, and my pubic hair just fell out, I think. Anyway, so all of a sudden this crowd of like, oh my God, firstly they see me in a sari expecting me to be Indian. I've got an Australian accent and I'm a comedian, so it was a funny experience. Anyway, I had the privilege of standing next to Mark Victor Hansen for about 20 minutes and telling the story of what I was doing in Third World, understanding about vaginal hygiene, the problems with menstruation, the problems of infertility with arranged marriages and what happens if you can't actually bear children. But also I discovered the barbaric practice of female genital mutilation. Now I'm talking about where they cut the inner and outer labia off a woman and sew it up. So with this I just thought this is, not acceptable to me, and I wanted to try and make a difference with that. So, and here I was on a platform with entrepreneurs all over the world. Mark's got his arm around me and I had the ability to, to spread this word. So anyway, with that, as I said, I'm going to cut the story short because it just went on. There was a whole lot of things that happened at that seminar, but a young boy came up to me and his name was Corey. And he said, hi Samantha, how are you? I said, great. And he just looked at me. I said, do I know you? He said, of course you know me well. And I said, no, I don't think so. Where are you from? And he said, Canada. And I said, no, where else have you been? I haven't been to Canada. And anyway, I didn't know him. And he looked at me strange then because he thought, he was convinced that he knew me. Anyway, the next day of the seminar, there was a doctor by the name of Dr. Tanya Jones from Atlanta, Georgia, and she came up and said, look, I'd like to get your card and we'll talk at some stage down the track. And also a woman came up by the name of Shamel Green, and she did a TV show called Manifesto, and she said, would you like to come into the studio on Tuesday? Would love to do an interview for the show and hear about what you're doing in Third World and how you've had the courage, because Manifesto is about how we manifest great stuff in our life. Anyway, so with that, hold that story, so that's for the Tuesday. On the Monday night, I went to another seminar, still in LA, so the Hub seminar had finished, and I was asked to be a speaker. In fact, it was an organisation called Excel. Excel stands for Extraordinary Lives. So I go in and I had to do a quick talk there, and as I'm talking, I looked around the room and here was this young guy called Corey, and I thought, that's where he knows me from. It turned out that that particular time I'd been nominated as Entrepreneur of the Year. And all over the tables in this room was a magazine, the Excel magazine, which had my story, a couple of photos of me, etc., etc. So I'm thinking he's seen the photos, read the story, and of course you know how sometimes you think you know somebody. Anyway, I finished talking and I was, had to leave. In fact, I was having dinner with Mark Victor Hansen, and I've got to drop that name. It's really nice to have him as a friend, let me tell you. Anyway, so this boy, what happened is I gave the microphone to some others, said, look, there must be other amazing stories that have happened to people. Here's the microphone, let's hear some other stories. And a boy sitting next to this boy, Corey, that's the one who came up, and the Canadian guy, and said he knew me, he gets the microphone and he said, actually, it's not my story I want to tell, it's my flatmate's here, Corey. And he said he's got an amazing story. So he handed the microphone to Corey. Corey's a sort of a shy sort of a person and, a little bit held back by actually speaking publicly. Anyway, Corey gets the microphone and he tells the story how at the age of 10 he was involved in such a bad car accident that from 10 to 15 he was in a coma. And I mean in a coma. From 15 to 21, he was out of the coma, but he was completely dysfunctional. This kid was seeing, lights and stars and being warm and fuzzy like you're on drugs type feeling, highs and lows. The problem was he was also quite suicidal at times because he was getting this funny feeling and seeing things and didn't know how to, articulate what was happening, that he just figured that life wasn't worth living because he couldn't drive, couldn't operate machinery, couldn't do anything. Anyway, at the age of 21, all of a sudden he looked in front of him and he said it's like looking at a 3D picture where you look at the picture and you don't see anything, but you adjust your eyes and you come back here and you actually see the picture. He's looking at this picture, or looking in front of him doing that, and all of a sudden he sees a dead person. Well, we know he's dead because it was his grandfather and had passed over. So, and then he looked again and he saw others and more and more and more. Anyway, they put him into hospital and they found out that the pituitary gland releases a chemical that puts you into a euphoric state when you're dying, so you cross over peacefully. In other words, you go into heaven well instead of going, oh my God, I'm dying. So anyway, he crosses over peacefully. What they found is that normally this chemical that is released when you're dying, and you'd see a light and a tunnel and someone dead, and then you are either revived and you can recall that, or you don't go, or you go further and then of course you can't recall that. Let me give you another example of that so you get it. Imagine someone who's drowned and they've only drowned for a couple of minutes, and they'll often say, oh, I saw this tunnel, I saw a light, and I saw my grandfather or my mother or someone that had passed over. So then, of course, they're alive, so they don't recall anymore. Corey actually releases this chemical for 2 to 4 hours at a time. In fact, the longest has been 4 days. So he'd actually crossed over for 4 days. So in other words, instead of just seeing the light, the tunnel and the dead person, he actually goes and lives in heaven. I'm thinking, wow, is this guy drinking? He wasn't, but I should have been. Once I heard this story, so I'm like, this is absolutely fascinating. I need to talk to this person further. I'm running out the room, ran back in, grabbed his card and said, I want to talk to you. So with that, hold that story, I've got his card. The next day I'm doing this show, Manifesto, and they've just said to me, look at the camera, tell us about yourself, we'll ask you a few questions and, we'll leave it at that. So anyway, it turns out because of my Australian humour, I've walked into the studio and it turns out all the right people are in the studio on this particular day. And they've come in while I'm doing the interview. So I'm sitting there and I'm talking to the camera, and Chamel's sitting to one side, and after 45 minutes she said, actually, we don't need to ask you anything because I think you've just answered every question that I would have asked you anyway. There's a whole lot of people there that have said, you've got something, you've got the right sort of personality for a TV show. Let's give you the possibility of having a TV show. Come in the studio tomorrow, bring a whole lot of people with you, do interviews, and let's see what we've got. Going back a bit, I've had a background for over 30 years in radio talking on health, so obviously I'm a natural speaker and can speak underwater, so that was in my favour too. With that, I've said, okay, who am I going to interview for this possibility of getting a show? And I'd only been in America a couple of days, so I thought, Corey, the guy that sees dead people, and a few other people. In fact, Don Tolman, who's an absolutely amazing man too. I call him the Indiana Jones of natural eating. This is a man who had discovered really how food is medicine and medicine is food, as Hippocrates says. In fact, he said, let thy food be thy medicine and thy medicine be thy food. So he was someone that I really looked up to because of his research that he'd done over a 17-year period, travelling the world, going through the scrolls of the world and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and looking at the Mayan way of eating and the Egyptian way of eating, and looking at how we actually did use foods as medicine once upon a time instead of just to get fat on and fill our stomach with poor nutrition. Anyway, so I've rung this guy, Corey, and of course he wasn't he wasn't home at the time, but his flatmate who'd introduced him on the Monday night at this seminar was there. And he said, where are you? I said, look, I'm in Hollywood, I'm just down the road. And he said, come over now. Corey's out having a run along the beach, he'll be back soon, and, talk to him. So I arrived over there before Corey actually got in, so Corey had no idea why I was coming. Anyway, I arrived there and Corey walks in and I said, hi Corey, how are you? Well, as you do. And I said, look, you don't know this about me. You know I'm the vagina doctor. You know I work in third world with vaginal hygiene and education on menses, and I actually do a little bit of sex talk stuff too, just as an education thing. Anyway, so I sat down and I said, look, this is what's happened to me. I went in and I did this interview, and now they've given me the possibility to do a TV show. Turns out, perfect timing, there was a writer's strike in America too, and of course with writer's strikes, often the interviewers don't have any new material because they read a sheet that, puts their humour and their questions and all that there. Me being unscripted could just talk, so again, just perfect timing. Funny how things work out in your life. I didn't realise this till hindsight. Anyway, so I said to Corey, I've got the possibility to get my own TV show. Can you come and let me interview you? He said, my God, that's where I know you from. I said, where? He said, Samantha, it's already happened in the future. I said, have you got a beer? So he went on to tell me how that's why he knew me, because this had already happened. He said, you helped make me a household name. He said, I'm a regular on your show. You have a live studio audience. He said, you go global very fast. He said, in fact, you end up on the Oprah show and you become bigger than her. And I definitely need 2 beers now, because to hear that sort of thing is just not what you expect to hear. I only had a short period of time with him, and because he was going out somewhere else, and I drove away from there completely in a void. I thought, what do you do when someone tells you that your future has happened and in such detail? And it turns out that it could be a possibility. Anyway, left there, couldn't sleep that night. Next morning I pick up Don Tolman from the airport, who'd just flown in from Utah. Utah's another experience, let me tell you about that one. Anyway, so I pick him up, get to the studio, and Corey's the first guest. So I'm sitting there on camera and I'm interviewing Corey. So Corey tells the story how he'd had the brain injury. In fact, he had a brother that was also in the car, and the brother actually still hadn't fully recovered all these years later. So you can imagine it was obviously a very bad accident. He told how the pituitary gland releases a chemical, puts you into euphoric state, crosses over, and how he crossed over 2 to 4 hours at a time. I said, Corey, so what you're saying there is dead people? Not just under the bed at night, but all around us all the time. He said, yeah. He said, heaven is on earth. He said, it's like the string theory, we're everywhere at once. We've got the whole time thing wrong. And the bottom line is that we are everywhere at once and there is spirit all around us. I said, okay, is there a God? He said, they're all there. He said, that's why there's such diversity in thinking. He said, because different dimensions that we go into, we see different gods. So as an example of that, if you're, let's say, smoking the peace pipe somewhere in the Indian culture, they would cross over into a certain dimension, see certain gods. Someone else would do maybe the Merkaba meditation and cross over into another dimension, and someone else would cross over into another dimension. So different peoples of the world doing different things would cross over into different dimensions. Therefore, they're all arguing that they've seen God and that's the God and etc. He said, but they're all there. Ganesh, the elephant god, is there. He said, there's actually no aliens. He said, what it is different spirits that look different to us. And now and then people have crossed over into that and seen them and think that, oh my God, they've seen aliens. So he's telling this story and I'm said, hang on, let me just go back a minute. You're telling me there's not just dead people, there's gods, and they're everywhere. And he said, yeah. I said, that's going to stop me masturbating. And by now, of course, he had my humour, so it was all okay, and I didn't even know what, this was just, let's just see what happens with this. They called me into the office and they said, Samantha Backman, you have something that we don't know whether you'll get away with it. You're Australian, you're a humour, you're articulate, you're smart, you're educated, maybe. Get back in the studio, do another few interviews with him, because we'd like him as a regular on your show. In fact, we'd like to build a studio audience because we'd like to see the studio audience's reaction when you say what you say. Again, we don't know whether you'll get away with it, but you say what people think. One of the other things that Corey had said, he said, on the show you look like Elizabeth Taylor the way they dress you. Next thing they've supplied me with a wardrobe lady, sure enough. The red lipstick, the padded shoulders, the push-up bra. I'm looking like a young Elizabeth Taylor on the show. So all the things that he started to say just within moments were happening, by lunchtime. And I started to freak out because I thought, wow, if my life has been written and this is the truth, then what's the point in thinking anything? Just go with the flow. Anyway, by the end of the day, all these things were going through my mind and I was doing other interviews, and because I didn't know what the show was about and someone said, well, what's it called? I said, geez, I don't know, I'm just waiting to channel that. And I said, whatever it is, it's got to be bloody brilliant. That'll do, we'll call it A Bloody Brilliant Life. And I picked people at random, but it turned out that everybody I'd picked, thinking that I'm talking to them on humanitarian stuff or what they've done with diet and all that, it turns out all of them had had spiritual experiences. So it was really funny looking at the mixed bag of people that I'd actually attracted to the show without understanding what I was doing. In fact, there was one guy who said he'd been struck by lightning. Well, that's unusual, but he'd been struck by lightning 3 times. Wow. Now that's freaky. But he'd been struck by lightning 3 times on the same date and different years. And he said that what happens is when people are often struck by lightning, they've got this power surge that goes through them, provided they're not killed, of course, and he would cross over into another dimension. And it turns out that in that other dimension you could be there for hours or weeks, but it only feels like seconds to us here. And often people that have said they've been abducted by aliens, they've had this power surge or been struck by lightning or something that's crossed them over, and they're not really being abducted by aliens, they're going into a dimension which doesn't look familiar to them. In fact, people look pretty strange, so they think they've been abducted by aliens. Anyway, with that, so I realised that there was something happening beyond me, that all of a sudden there were different people coming into my life that I was supposedly picking randomly, but there was a common message through all of them. So I sat with Corey this night. I said, Corey, I've got to know more. I mean, this is just happening within days, 2 days. So I hadn't had a chance to have a long talk with Corey. So I sat down with him. I said, look, what's going on? You've got to, what is this? Why is this happening to me? And he said, Samantha Backman, you've been chosen. You've been chosen as a messenger. The universe has seen what you're doing, and you are the right person to deliver this message on a global level, on women and women's health and women's rights and all that sort of thing. So with that kind of freaked me out a bit too, and I thought, okay, messenger, I mean, what do you do when people ask you what you do? Oh, I'm a messenger, hi. And it didn't really sit with me quite well, and I didn't know how to accept that. I'm going to jump the story now and get to the main part, because a lot of other things happened too which sort of indicated to me that obviously there was something happening way, way beyond whatever I could imagine. 6 weeks after meeting Corey, the doctor from Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Tanya Jones, actually rang me and said, can you fly to Atlanta, Georgia? And I'm thinking, okay, that's a bit of a trip, let me think about that. And she said, no, I'll fly you over here, I'll put you up in accommodation because I need to tell you something. So anyway, I hop on a plane. This is by the end of the day. In fact, an hour later, she said, I booked the accommodation, I booked the flight, you're on it. So I get to the airport, not quite sure what was going to happen when I got there. Flew over there, she picks me up at the airport, we go to the hotel, and she said, I've been asked to call you here. I've got something to tell you. And I said, well, who asked you to call me here? She said, Spirit. She said, I'm a white witch. I said, a few weeks ago if I'd heard that would have really freaked me out. But right now, I'm open to it. She said, I'm here to tell you, so are you. Okay, now you're freaking me out. I better have a beer. Anyway, so with that, she then said, you have actually, since I met you, I've been channeling stuff. Spirit asked me to call you to let you know you've been chosen as a messenger. I said, they're not going to nail me to the cross, are they? And she said, no, but you have a unique delivery system with humour, the way you deliver something, you will get away with murder. I thought, yep, that sounds like me. And that you are one of the few that the universe will use to send stuff through. Let me say, this actually did freak me out, because the whole experience with Corey and all the little things that have been happening, meeting the right people, right place, there was just too many coincidences. Here's me working my whole life with a business plan. Get rid of the business plan. Just let it go, because this is what was happening to me. So after that episode, a lot of other stuff happened, but I ended up going back and spending some time in Australia and telling, different people what had happened. And I thought, okay, so if your life's being chosen, there's no point writing anything. Don't have a to-do list, because it's already happening. In fact, none of these things that were happening to me were even on my to-do list. Anyway, I was sitting there one night in Australia and sort of, looking up at the sky going, okay, which is crazy because God isn't up there, he's kind of here in this same dimension as us, but we do that. We look up when we pray, or we look up and, ask the universe for help. And with my background in biochemistry and understanding how things work, and understanding that between you and I now there is a whole lot of little protons and atoms and things that just because we can't see them with the naked eye doesn't mean they're not there. In fact, it's like a quantum soup. There's so much life between you and me, and at the moment that it's just, there's more life there than what there is here. And I started to look at that and say, okay, and if you look at the example that Esther Hicks gives on the law of attraction, where she talks about that there's this stuff out there in the universe that when you put your thoughts out to it, it actually picks that up. So I started to play with this idea and thought, okay, then if things are picked up by our thoughts, and like the video, The Secret, you put it out there and then it comes back. Yet with this, I hadn't put it out there, but there was something that it had picked up in what I was doing. Anyway, I couldn't think. I'm just like, how do you comprehend what's going on? So I decided to actually ask the universe, and he was certainly not religious, in fact, an atheist, and really, not that I didn't believe, I didn't have time to worry about believing, so it was easier just to go, look, there's nothing really there, anyway, I'll get on with my life. And I looked up this night and said, okay, I thought there's nobody looking, so no one can laugh at me. And I looked up and I said, okay, I give up. I give up, I believe. What happened then completely blew me away. And I still get very emotional about it, because it was so unexpected that, here was me going, no, there's nothing really there, and if it is, why isn't it helping people that are really in need? Why would it want to help me? Because I'm literally nobody. But what I got back was just, I can't describe it, but I heard it back, and he was me still sort of arguing with myself, going, this can't be happening, I can't be getting this. And I knew it wasn't me because I wouldn't have said that. In fact, I was surprised at what came back. And ever since then, and it's only been, in that it took me a year to actually get this, but I realised that I had been chosen, and it's really still hard to talk about because, as I said, I was the person that just didn't believe and thought that it was all frog shit. And all of a sudden, stuff was coming to me. And I realised that I had been chosen. In fact, it was a little while after that, I, again, just asked a question, was driving down the road, and what came back was so fast and so instant that I had to pull off the road. I literally couldn't drive, and I lost it for half an hour or so because I was so humbled, in humility at all the things that I'd thought and all the things that I'd said to try and discredit anyone that looked or believed in something that was out there. And I realised there was. And from then on, different things. I'm scared to ask questions, and I've got to be careful when I ask questions because the answer comes back instantly. And if you're out in some public places and you lose it like I do right now, it doesn't go down too well because they think you've had too much to drink. And especially when you say you're talking to God, then they really think you're freaking out. And I couldn't even go with the word God because it gave this connotation of religion and the politics of religion and there's been more people killed in the name of religion than any other organisation. So I actually called my spirit, or my connection with spirit, Wallace. And the reason I call it Wallace, meaning the whole blanket spirit world, is I remember reading a book called, it was written by a guy called Wallace Wattles, The Science of Getting Rich. And it turned out in, I think it was about 1912, 1911, 1912, he'd written that book, and he had actually channeled it. And in the first edition of the book, it mentioned that he had channeled it. And of course the whole world went, oh, you can't say that because we don't want to, let it be known that things are channeled from a spirit. And I thought, well, hang on, wasn't the Bible channeled? Anyway, that's another story. So what happened is I just wanted to give it a generic name, and because of reading this book and understanding, as Wallace said, that there is living stuff out there that is picked up by our thoughts, picks up the energy of our thoughts and comes back. So I'm sitting there this night and I'm talking to Wallace, which is my spirit, and I said, how does it work that you have people that people that are really in poverty, have nothing, and they're praying all the time for something, and yet it doesn't seem to help? And the answer I got back is that living stuff only picks up vibration. When we look at that aura or energy field around us, an aura is mostly, or that energy field, the reason that they can photograph it is it's water. It's like a steam or a fog that comes off us. Within that water, or in that like a cloud around us, that water is cerebrospinal fluid, which is the same fluid that's in our brain, down our spine. In fact, it's shown up in every cell in our body. Every cell in our body, including our aura, is able to think and hold thoughts. So if it's made of water, what it means is it picks up like a wave, it picks up the energy. If you ping the side of a glass that's got water in it, that water will vibrate because of the sound that goes through it. So when we're praying, we're often praying in a state of using their head, going, oh, poor me, nothing seems to happen for me, instead of taking it to our heart, and the heart actually picking up the vibration of it, and the heart putting the vibration out into spirit. And that's when the spirit hears it. So talking to Wallace and trying to understand how it works for some and not with others, I actually channeled a program called The Heartbeat of Wealth. Wealth not in money, but wealth in who we are. And I looked at all the areas of life and I came up with 12. No matter what I did, Buddha says there was 8, and different people have said 8, but it kept coming up as 12. And I spoke to Wallace one day and said, look, I don't know that I can do this. I need help. And he said, Samantha, I've given you the 12 apostles. And I tell you what, that blew me away, because I realised that the 12 areas of life that I channeled really was the 12 apostles. They were the helpers that were there. And for those that, you know, are watching this and thinking, oh, this is crazy, she's away with the fairies, I'm surprised too. And there was a time in my life that I thought I was away with the fairies too, because I thought this just can't be happening. But the bottom line is that our heart it has the highest vibration of all the organs of the body. And when you take something from the head, it's like when you look at you know, when we manifest stuff, we go, yes, yes, we want it, we want it, we want it, and we put it out to the universe. But when we put it down into the heart with gratitude and say, thank you, I accept it, it's already happened, then we get that, it goes into our heart, and our heart has a different type of beat, and that puts it out into the universe. The universe, or spirit, picks it up because it hears that. It doesn't see us. In fact, the universe only sees us when we're illuminated. And the only way we're illuminated is that energy. Yes, I can do it, and I'm going to do it, and all that. Whereas so many people, when they're praying to spirit, go into that, oh, poor me, you know, why won't you help me? So, of course, they haven't got that energy, that heartbeat that spirit hears. Another thing I discovered with talking to Wallace was that we sometimes, I used to think that this was us. It turns out it's not. Us is the spirit side of us. And the spirit side, which starts off as tiny little nothing almost, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it comes into the solid. And the solid is what we see, and we can see each other in that, but it's not us. The spirit of us is really us. This is just, you know, I'm trying to put it another way. When you build a pyramid, the pyramid is only the end result of someone thinking about it, putting a whole lot of steps in motion to make a pyramid of which we can see, but it starts off as a dream and a vision of somebody. Those protons, atoms, I don't have another way to describe it, but that living stuff there is really us. And it's come together to build a solid form of us so we can see ourselves in the mirror and try and get, you know, put a personality to it. It's not us at all. Us is out here. I just am so overwhelmed still, because that's something, and that's something of everybody else. In fact, going back to the point that it is pure creation in its most simplest form, I'm privileged to have been chosen. I'm humbled to be chosen. I'm still not sure what to do it, but I do know that it's not about me. It's not about my thinking. It's about coming from my heart. And let me tell you a story. There's a nursing home with old and dying patients in it. And the doctor's doing his rounds, and he comes up to this person and says, or the person says to the doctor, "Doctor, you don't understand. I'm not crying because I'm dying. I'm crying because I never lived." A little bit later, that person's dream walks in the room. And the person bowed their head in shame when they saw their dream. And the dream said, "Why didn't you ever use me?" And the person said, "Because I always thought there was tomorrow." And the dream said, "We only ever have now. We only ever have this moment that we are in. That's all we've got." And the person said, "Well, I didn't think I could." And the dream said, "You only ever had to believe in me, and I was there." And I knew when I heard that can't be me. That I have to live in the moment, and I have to come from the heart, and I have to make the difference, because I've been privileged to be given this opportunity to live my life far beyond what you can imagine. And it's so much easier coming from your heart, because you don't have to think. You live in the moment, and your heart tells you in every second what needs to be done. So with that, if there's one message that I can pass on, that spirit is there for all of us. But we spend too much time in our head and too much time analysing instead of trusting and accepting. And when you say, thank you, I give up, I am yours, that's where you'll find the truth.
Well, thank you so much, Samantha. I've had an absolute, it's just been completely inspirational. I understand how women just want to meet you and to talk to you, because I wanted to come with a plan, with an interview, and to go through, bullet points. And you've just made me realise that I need to live my dream, and that it needs to come from the heart. And, you need to just not have a plan, and just live the life, and just do what you want to do and what's best. And I've just had such an emotional time with you, because I just feel so I just don't know, I'm overwhelmed. I really, really am. And thank you so much. I've had such a wonderful time with you, and I've got so much to tell everybody. It's just been absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much. Thank you very much for Samantha Backman to join me in this interview. And it's just been absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.